For this, I'm excited to talk about some really important issues in augmented reality. And I didn't realize it was mic'd up to speakers. This is awesome. I thought I was going to have to scream, so thank you. But yeah, so we had an amazing camp out, and we talked about a lot of issues at this camp out. Many people in this room were there, and some were not. And some of the things we talked about, we thought we should open up to a broader audience. So this is going to be recorded, and then when we're done, we're going to put it online on Twitter, and we will edit it, obviously. So if there's anything anyone says that they don't want out there, just let us know, and we will take it out. No pressure.
Should be worried about him. It's me.
Worried about Phil here. So yeah, I want to start with introducing John Hanke and Phil Keslin. John is the CEO of Niantic, and Phil is the CTO. And they are the creators of Pokemon Go, which I'm sure a lot of people here are aware of. Congratulations on your round of funding. And
thank you, Cyan.
Yeah. And Harry Potter. Super excited about Harry Potter. I'm sure you can't talk about that too much tonight.
No.
But you're a pioneer in the space, and that comes with certain policy changes, particularly as it pertains to the First Amendment. And when I went online to try to figure out what sort of discussions were taking place on this topic, and there's actually very few. There's a few blog posts, but I think it's actually such a huge issue, and that we're not thinking about it as much as we should, because we're going to come head to head with it pretty soon. So what happens when we protect, what sort of protections do we have when we augment public spaces? How do we approach this world that employs two-dimensional laws in an increasingly three-dimensional world? So why don't we start by talking about a recent case, John? Basically the Milwaukee County versus Candy Lab. Is anyone here familiar with that case at all? Okay, great, awesome. So not a lot of background context there.
Do you want me to explain the case?
Yeah, if you can explain the case and kind of what happened, and we'll start there.
Okay, sure. So this was the Milwaukee County Park Commission basically passed a regulation that said that any augmented reality game would have to apply in advance for a permit before it could be allowed to exist. And they sent us the form, and the permit form was the same form that you would fill out if you were having a 4th of July picnic or something. So you would specify how many people were coming and all of that, and pay a fee, of course.
Per person.
As well.
Not kidding.
But I mean, yeah, that wasn't the thing that was troubling. It was just that, that act of sort of pre-registration with, a local authority obviously would be a huge inhibitor if you wanted to have a nationwide or global experience. It would be pretty much impossible if that were in fact the rule everywhere. So it was one of those situations that really opened our eyes. It was, the facts of the case were that obviously, Pokemon Go had been very popular in that area. It continues to be very popular, but there were certain parks there where large numbers of people had gathered. There were issues with trash, and there were neighbors that weren't happy that all of these people had come to their quiet neighborhood. There was a particular park in an affluent part of town that had attracted people to the park in numbers that had not been seen before. And so that, from what we heard, that group of local citizens had then complained to the city council, which had then leaned on the park authority to sort of do something about it. And they passed that. Kind of while we were negotiating with them, talking with them, trying to talk them off the cliff of actually going forward with the regulation, another company, Candy Lab, is the name of the company.
What do they do?
They make an AR poker game or something.
It's an AR poker game, yeah.
Is anybody here with Candy Lab? Okay. You're not actually, are you?
No, I'm seriously, Andrew. Andrew's the CEO. Candy Lab.
Okay.
You know him, but you're not him.
But you're not.
Okay.
No, he's asking before he disparages.
So I've never met
Just kidding.
See the camera?
Yeah, I
This
know.
is not. But they actually they stepped forward. There is, I guess, a nascent industry trade association, and they worked together to file this brief. It was actually a great brief, and it was about protecting free speech, essentially.
So Candy Lab saved the day.
Yeah,
they asked for an injunction against this, and that ultimately was granted, and the judge kind of cast aspersion on the regulation. There was no final ruling about it. It was a preliminary ruling, but it was enough that the city backed off and they've decided not to enforce. And actually, today or yesterday, they announced that they're reimbursing Candy Lab for the legal fees. I think
Oh, wow.
it's $85,000
Oh, that's awesome.
in legal fees.
It's great for
so
them.
They did kind of back off from that, but it's kind of a close call. But it's probably a sign of many more discussions like that to come, I think.
Yeah, and I guess that segues well into my next question is what sort of impacts do you believe that ruling is going to have on our future of location-based AR gaming?
The impact of that ruling, well, I mean, I hope it's, I mean, it definitely went the right direction in terms of the free speech arguments got made, and there was this ruling that suggested that, hey, before you jump in and start regulating things like this, you need to pay attention to what the impact is on speech. So that's a good thing, but there are a lot of jurisdictions in the world, and you know, the thing with AR is that, you know, it sort of weirdly bleeds the digital and sort of local property and kind of local physical access laws and regulations, which, you know, tend to be made and adjudicated at the local government level. So there's certainly room for lots of different interpretations about how that should work to happen in cities around the world. So, you know, that's the thing that we're all facing, you know, and I think it's probably something that we will, if you all are involved in, you know, AR and related kind of technologies, it's probably something that frankly is going to be an ongoing discussion, debate, policy, tug of war for the next many years, I think.
I think the key phrase in that, though, is world, right? Like this was adjudicated in a county in Wisconsin. It doesn't really talk about what happens everywhere else.
Right, right.
Yeah, and there's cities can do strange things. I mean, there's a city in France that banned Pokemon Go completely, you know, so it's illegal to play Pokemon Go in that country. I mean,
Yeah,
in that city, rather.
So do you feel that in America there are more challenges than say in the rest of the world? Like, or how, like that is a good point that you brought up about the world.
I think it's a question of scale, though, right?
Right.
I mean, where's the game played the most? And that tends to amplify the effects.
Well, there are legal protections for free speech here in the United States
Yep.
that don't exist in most places in the world. So we're probably in much better position to defend it from a free speech point of view here than in other countries. And in addition to the sort of authoritarian types of governments where you really just don't respect free speech at all, you know, Europe's an interesting situation because you have a very aggressive kind of privacy policy there, and there's a new version of that, as I'm sure many of you are aware, coming down the pike. So, you know, that's going to create, I think, a pretty challenging environment as well. That would be my guess, just based on past experience with things like Google Street View in Europe and the kind of policy perspective on that. The DPAs in each country and
Well, the beauty of AR, and someone would say the bane of its existence, is that there's going to be multiple layers of AR experiences. So there'll be the Niantic layer, maybe the Facebook layer, the Snap layer, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all based on the same exact location. So what are the solutions to sort of address some of these concerns about, you know, people coming to a place en masse, coming to something that technically is just, you know, sort of a row in a database? So like private property owners of physical property, like making rules of conduct, or have you seen anything that you've worked with like local governments or private property owners to try to figure out how to address these situations? Because eventually it's going to be, you know, looking out 2-3 years from now, there's going to be multiple companies potentially at the scale you're at today. Yeah,
I mean, there's sort of what can you or what should you be able to do at the far extreme as a matter of free speech. We have tried to be accommodating of the realities of what it really means for people to be using an experience like this in the real world, and to, you know, just be reasonable about it. So, for example, if private business owners say, "Hey, we don't really want people coming to our private business. We'd rather not be in your game," then we will remove them. If a park says to us, "Hey, you know, we close the park at 10 p.m. We really don't want people trying to come into the city park after hours, or trying to scale the fence after we lock the gates to the local zoo or whatever." I mean, that's reasonable to us, and so, you know, we have hours of operation, you know, things that we've added since we launched the game to try to accommodate. So there might be cases where you would have really the right to to do something in an extreme case, but I think it's probably better if we save those for the, the places where you really want to, give a strong political opinion about something you want to express, and in other cases try to be reasonable and work with local communities and to try to avoid practical problems like too many people showing up or people showing up in places where they're not wanted. At the same time, there are situations like public parks where you want to give the local community and local citizens an opportunity to express themselves. Like, what do they want to do? Like, there are cases where you have a local park and they reserve part of the park for weddings, and they have certain sections they really don't want people to use at certain times a day, or for certain, maybe they think it's okay for people to play soccer there, but they don't want people to play Pokemon there, or some other AR experience. Just kind of weird interpretations. And so, rather than just accepting what some individual local official says without any kind of public hearing or giving the public a chance to sort of weigh in and express what they want, that makes me a little uncomfortable. So, we've adopted this policy of tombstoning a location. So if we, take it down in some sort of public area, we say this was removed at the request of the such and such organization. So at least if people disagree with that decision,
Then go do something about
they
it.
can have a local discussion about that. And, there may be people on both sides of the issue locally, and it should be kind of worked out
Have you
at
had that
level.
happen? Like a town hall discussion of a tombstone Pokestop?
Many, yeah. I mean, in fact, in the Milwaukee case, they had public hearings, and the Go players and the Ingress players showed up en masse to defend their right to play the games in these public parks. And
That's awesome.
so, yeah.
So my Scott came up with this really awesome analogy. Basically, and it kind of threw me for a bit, but it's totally similar. But how similar is augmented reality to a Yelp review?
Yeah, it's interesting when you really kind of break down what you're saying there, because there is this sort of kind of semantic confusion about AR in terms of you think about placing an object in a place, and it's very easy to talk about it and think about it in terms of like atoms and physical space, because you're trying to simulate that in a sense, and with digital things. So it does start to feel at a gut level to people, and people start using the language about, oh, you put something on my property, as if you really place some atoms there in a piece of property that they owned, rather than having a row in a database that has latitude and longitude as one of the attributes, and some descriptors of some visualization that somebody can perceive through a digital device when they're there, in the same way that they might be able to read a Yelp review or read an unfavorable commentary about how the city council is run if they went to city hall. So I think it is really dangerous to start trying to regulate this, and it's dangerous when people start talking about it using these physical analogies, because that's not correct, I think, and would lead to a very restrictive way of thinking about this whole thing.
Yeah, that's one thing that scares me, is there are a lot of conversations around that, which is trying to think of it as a physical thing versus just a row in a database.
And I mean, we kind of were guilty. I mean, we kind of want to suggest to the user that it's real. In the context of the game, you want to say, this virtual character, it's really there, and you want to make it as realistic as possible, and you want to be able to walk around it and have the right lighting and have it cast a shadow. And we are trying to make it feel as if it's there, but in reality, it's not, and it's only there if a person wants to use the right software to perceive it, and people with different software can see different things. And I kind of think it should be up to an individual to decide what sort of filter they want to put over their perception of the world, not for the world to decide what kind of filter that you can have when you perceive it.
So yeah, what is the short-term ideal solution? There's a lot of people in the audience and the people who are going to watch this who are entrepreneurs, who are thinking about these issues as they design their products. What do you think are some of the solutions that you would advise them to implement in their design, or how they think about what they're doing, that could help them when it comes to these free speech issues?
Well, I mean, going back to the thing that I said earlier, I think when you are designing an experience, to be respectful of what kind of an impact you think that is likely to have, and just try to be reasonable about accommodating the interests of all the parties that might be affected by it if it exists, and to not be too brash or clueless about that. I mean, I think Silicon Valley kind of gets a bad rap, and certainly in Washington, it has an increasingly negative connotation of just people being insensitive and being very rigorous in their interpretation of things, but not being practical about how it actually affects people, or really acknowledging when there are legitimate issues to be discussed. So I think, we don't want to be perceived that way. I think it's important that, whatever you think of, whoever represents you in Congress, but it's important for them to see us as people that are aware and savvy and sensitive to what impact our products are actually having in the real world. To listen when there are issues and try to just be reasonable and be engaged. Don't be an ivory tower. Don't be silent. Don't just trash those emails. I think we actually have to engage with policymakers, local government, citizens that may not understand what we're doing. It's important because I do think there's this sort of anti-big tech backlash, which may extend to an anti-little tech backlash too if it sort of keeps rolling. And that would be bad for innovation in this space.
And is there anything Niantic specifically is working on, or is it just sort of a constant thing that you're working on with this, around this issue? Like, do you have an initiative, or how does it work internally?
Our big initiatives are, one, to engage with policymakers. So we started as a very lean startup. We just had engineers, product people, and as little overhead as we could possibly have. And the last thing I ever wanted was a policy team. We had to add one after the launch of our product, and some of these issues sort of started to arise. But I have come to appreciate the fact that we can't ignore people in Washington. Even if they're saying something you think is ridiculous or clueless, it's kind of your obligation to go there and talk and explain. And only by doing that are we going to educate people and have them make informed, good public policy. So you guys are smart people and great communicators. So the more of us that do that and help explain and help people understand, I think the better policy is going to get made. The other thing that we are putting a lot of energy into is just building tools to allow us to interface with legitimate local communities and groups, to allow them to give us feedback about kind of how they want the product to work in their area, and if they do want sort of hours of operations or certain things removed, or other places they want sort of more stuff there. It's, again, we're trying to find the public voice and not allow some local power broker to speak for the people. And it's a difficult thing to do, to know who to engage with and who to trust and kind of how to navigate those waters. It's actually quite tricky, but you can't ignore it. So we're trying to figure that out and build the right tools to allow that sort of communication and feedback to happen.
Do you think there's room for an air traffic control sort of GPS type service that everybody sort of subscribes to, that helps, if I want to geofence this place and I'm I don't want Banksy art here, because everybody is knocking on my door because they want to see the Banksy I have inside. Do you think that is useful, or?
Well, should it be a unified thing, or should each sort of company or product offering its services come up with its own self-policed regulation about what do you do about a private space? How does something get put in a private space, and how does that get publicized to people who may not have access to that private space? Those are certainly issues that we confront, and I think many of you might confront if you're doing work in this area. I don't know. It might make sense for there to be some sort of unified thing. I think different kinds of products are going to have different use cases and different audiences and different kind of access models built into them. So I don't know if there's a one-size-fits-all kind of answer to that.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Cool.
We're going to move to the next panel, and then afterwards we're going to have about 20 to 25 minutes of people asking questions directly to the panelists. So I find that sometimes talking obviously up here is fun, but I think hearing from the audience is even more fun. So we'll bring you guys back up after you meet the next three panelists. Thank you. So I get to make this joke because I'm sure it never gets old. Yes. Oh. This is Diana Ross. Well, Diana Ross, the other way.
We have the Supreme Office.
You have the Supreme Office, Diana and Ross. They're from Escher Reality, which is a wonderful company. And they're basically experts, computer vision and machine learning experts from MIT and Carnegie Mellon. And they work on back-end cross-platform for mobile AR, which we will explain in a little bit for anybody who doesn't know why that's important, why it's important. And then Paul is from Torch 3D, previously at Magic Leap and many other places, is working on what I like to call, but maybe you can explain it a little bit more, which is Envision for 3D. So if you can imagine fast prototyping for 3D and why that might be important, which we'll get into. So yeah, so I'm going to go through some of these. It was interesting because I've been talking to some people. Some people in the audience are very well versed on these subjects, so like maybe it won't surprise any of you, but keep in mind some people here might not actually know. But Ross and Diana, we've seen a lot of false starts in AR and VR. A lot of people just say, oh, now's the time for VR, now's the time. Now's the time for AR, but then like something happens and you're like, okay, kind of like with ARKit. There was a lot of hype leading up to ARKit. Even Tim Cook got up there and said it was the future. I said it was the future. I still believe it's the future. So I think we're on the cusp of what will be a massive shift in computing behavior. Do you agree?
Well, betting my career on it.
Okay.
So if you think about like how, or for me personally, like computing, there's like different phases that you've gone through. There was like the PC desktop phase, there's kind of the mobile phase. Now we're starting to get into this kind of wearable computing phase in terms of headsets. But what's interesting about it is, like, and I think this gets to the reason why there are a whole bunch of false starts, is a lot of these, like for desktops, for mobile, it's getting humans to adapt to computers. So if you think about like we learn how to type, we learn how to use a mouse, we learn how to swipe. So, but if you think about like with AR and even VR to a certain degree, it's getting computers to adapt to the world. Now, the thing is everyone kind of expects this like huge immediate ramp up where everything's gonna rush in, like with ARKit, or if you're figuring, oh, it's gonna take a little bit of time. That's for two reasons. One, dealing with things that interact with the real world, like the world is literally the biggest variable. So being able to handle that amount and understanding of kind of all the different data that you have to deal with, like that's a really, really hard problem. So it's also getting people to adapt to that line of thinking of how do you incorporate the real world into this level of computation. So, and then the second part is, it's just completely different mechanics on how you deal with things. Like the time that it took cell phones to, or like touch screens to kind of grow, I mean, while it was, again, getting humans to adapt to it, it's still like a different medium. So like, what is a UI interface for like augmented reality? How do you begin to interact with the real world? So if you think about it, like AR kind of introduces like the real world becomes content that you can interact with. So like that is a new way of thinking about things. There's content that content developers create, and then there's the content that the algorithms create that mimics the real world. So then like thinking about how you approach that is a new way of thinking about it. So what, is this kind of a false start in a sense? No, I think it's a steady step up that may not be this like immediate, like in 3 years, quick exponential, but it's just, there are a whole bunch of new problems that people have never dealt before. But like, okay, if Apple puts their foot down, like, okay, ARKit, we're like, what, 2-3 months into it? Like, think about, oh, is the App Store dead? Because at the beginning you had fart apps and flashlights. Like, I mean, evaluate it like in a couple years. So like, personally, I think it's gonna be like, probably the next 9 to 12 months is going to be a time when everyone's still figuring it all out. But it just takes time to develop good content. And then that usually takes on the order, like we look at the gaming space as a first market, and like it takes 9 to 12 months to make a good game. Like I don't know how long Pokemon Go took to make, but I imagine it was more than like 3 months that we've had for ARKit. So like it will have its time, it will just take time to develop.
How much time do you think?
Putting it on the spot there. So again, for content developers, like understanding the gaming space, which is where a lot of this stuff has been going, I think that that's gonna take on the order of like 9 months to a year as people are figuring out what are the right game mechanics. So if you think about like as a startup, we need to care a lot about what does the next 12 months look like, what does the next 18 months look like, while like larger companies can focus on what do the next 5-10 years look like because we need funding. So, so then, social pressure. No, Cyan's awesome.
He did kill me at Werewolf, by the way, just saying.
Still? Anyway,
It's gonna stay.
Go on.
yeah. So then it's like more about what do the next 12 to 18 months look like, and then I actually think like the first good games are going to be coming out like next summer, next fall, that have like longer development cycles, and then how those get developed. So at least I would say my own personal prediction is for the mobile AR space, probably looking like next summer to next fall for some of the longer term kind of repeat games, unless there's like Harry Potter games that people have been working on for a while. So in terms of like headsets, I view the first developer kits, at least from here internally, as like 2.5, 3 years for them coming out. Like you'll hear some announcements for kind of, and this is like for the bigger players like the Facebooks, like maybe even the Apples of the world. I mean, Magic Leap, I hope that they launch something soon, otherwise they're gonna tank the whole AR market. Seriously, like 3/4 of all investment in AR has been Magic Leap. Like if they go down, we're all screwed. So I view like on the, I missed that, but I probably don't want to know. But I view for like consumer adoption of AR headsets probably on the order of even 5 years. So.
Okay, awesome. So let's talk about the state of AR in general. What is the state of AR today, and why is it important, and how does it work?
In terms of like, what do you mean by
Stateful AR, my bad.
Stateful AR.
Yes, that would be Diana.
Okay.
Sorry.
So part of what does stateful mean? I mean, part of augmented reality, you have to kind of come. There's two parts to the answer. One is more in the conceptual, philosophical aspect. Is us as human, how do we perceive reality? There's three things. There's matter, time, and space. And then part of it, organizing a lot of this information, is having a state that correlates to the digital world, which would be the AR representation. As part of that, then, the second part of the answer is more, how do you then do this in terms of computer science? So this first, the definition, more the conceptual level, then more at the, how do we actually make it happen? So then backtracking a little bit, what does time and space and matter mean in terms of the digital representation? So time could mean synchronizing interactions across the present or the future or the past, so sort of how you store your game state. That could be one, or more how you have a real-time gameplay, like a shooting game. And then space is very important for us to really understand the 3D space. So then having things stick, if you tell, I don't know, let's say you build a game and you want to put like a digital plant, it should stay in that table.
Or a Fiji water bottle.
Or a Fiji bottle,
There you go.
right? So, I mean, part of it, if you don't do that well, having it stay there, you break the illusion. And the whole thing about the promise of AR is having this immersive experience. So part of it is like, okay, if I leave it there, it should stay there. And part of it is like, okay, come back and exit, come back a couple weeks, it should still be there. So current solutions like ARKit don't enable that. So that's not stateful AR. Because the way the solution works is that it's just based on gyro accelerometer. I mean, they did a good job with that, but it only works in a current session. And it's relative to that particular phone. So if you have two phones, even in the same space, you're still missing the time synchronization. And so that's missing. And the space also because it's their own representation with their own phone. So it's missing those components. And then
You're dealing with multiple platforms too.
This is just iOS. So then it's missing all that. So what we are building on is enabling the backend of AR, the infrastructure to enable time synchronization and space. So remembering AR state, synchronizing gameplays or experiences with AR so that you have multiple users sharing the same AR experience. So that is what.
This is the only way we're going to be able to have like multiplayer gaming, which is kind of like the holy grail of sort of AR, really.
Well, if you think about it, like every phone has their own representation of the world, or every headset. So you kind of need to build it, and then essentially, but it's all of the same world. Like all of us interact with the same chairs, everything else, we all see it. But then in the digital space, you have all these different copies. So it's kind of like having a version of everything like duplicated by the number of people. So then that should all be condensed down into one.
Having it work in a single phone or a single headset still rooted in reality, it's not good enough. It's not that much different, let's say, than VR, because it's still lonely. You want to play with people together at the same time. So a lot of this in terms of the technical challenges come with handling things with latency, and then how do you take the copy of this reality here into a row in a database and be able to retrieve it back and forth and do it really quick across multiple devices and platforms so that you have a reality that works across phones and headsets as well.
Pretty tough problem.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys are working on it.
Fun times, fun times, fun times.
Paul.
Yes.
So I believe one of the reasons we've had a couple of false starts too is that sometimes like with VR, we've got headsets that are there, but the content's not there.
Yep.
And maybe you can talk us through sort of like what are the challenges that designers and creatives have to even create this content that could even be stateful, because we don't even have a lot of the content.
Yeah, actually, that's a great way to frame it. So where Escher is working on solving a problem most people don't know they have yet. So when I first met these guys and I heard about it, I was like, yes, of course, that is a very hard technical problem. And in my time at Magic Leap, we kind of lived in this world for a few years of this is already a possible technology as far as this 3D feeling like it's part of your physical world. And once you get kind of past the mind blown part of that, like what do I actually do with it that's useful and of value? And so like in that ecosystem where my company fits in is probably helping people think in 3D faster so they can more quickly realize they need their solution than most people realize. So in other words, like right now, if you wanted to work in AR, you're probably going to go to a game engine. And like even you guys talked a lot about games, right? Games is a natural progression into what we're getting into because it's interactive 3D. It's real-time interactive 3D, which is modern-day video games. And the tech stack is coming from video games. And I got into video games, video game development 10 plus years ago because it was so technically challenging and difficult. And it is not something conducive to somebody that just has sort of a kooky AR idea that they want to, what does it feel like to have a Fiji water bottle in the room? Well, I don't need to have everyone see it at the same time just yet. I just want to know, me as a professional creative or as someone with an idea, how can I try that out? And right now, the answer is become a game developer, essentially, which is painful and expensive. And then on top of that, even if you have, and a lot of people are hitting that wall, we call it the brick wall of 3D, right? This workflow is very difficult. And then even if you manage to scale that wall, then you get to the point where these guys are, which is, well, I want you to be able to see the Fiji water ball in the same place that I see it, and I don't want this like overly complicated user experience around. I just want to be able to tell you, everybody, don't we see this virtual thing here? So where we're looking at it is getting more people thinking about 3D computing at a much more general level, like kind of like what you alluded to earlier, which is this new frontier, this third dimension. I think we all, especially people here tonight, sense that there's a lot of untapped potential in that third dimension. And we're all three-dimensional people that live in a three-dimensional world. So why is it so hard for me to create a concept or communicate a 3D concept virtually? And so that's what our big focus is around is, you see a lot of demos and stuff online and a lot of people that say like, oh, I can create an AR thing in 3 lines of code. But to really package that up into a commercial quality, what we call a product level experience is still very, very difficult to do. So what we're looking at is in the ecosystem, I agree with Ross's timeline, by the way. I think next year is going to be a lot of experimentation and a little bit deeper diving, and we're hoping to accelerate all that. And so by removing the requirement of how do I learn a game engine, how do I hire a game developer, how do I teach my really talented UX designer to become a game developer, can't they just grab a model from TurboSquid or Sketchfab, and can't they pull in a 2D thing they made and just see it? Like, why is that so hard? And that's what we're hoping to unlock that. And so we talk a lot about unlocking for that reason. And
it seems like everyone I talk to, no matter what platform, they're all hungry for content. Like,
Yes, so
there's
yes,
just
sorry.
not enough of it.
Yeah, so, and that is the ultimate blocker, right? Takes a long time to make a video game, without a doubt, a good one. And it takes just as long for someone to learn, that's for someone that already knows the workflow. So when we talk about content, and we talk about lack of content in VR and AR, you see a lot of game content and a lot of demo level content, but not a lot of utility. Like these things that are really gonna, the software and the experiences that are really gonna turn these into, I must have this in my life every day. You know, I have a Vive and a PC set up in my living room practically as an appliance. Like I can just turn it on and just use it, and I don't use it every day. Why? Like why can't I use it for work? You know, and I think, you know, your Oculus with Dash, and I think people are exploring more outside of gaming, kind of these initial demo experiences. But what we're seeing is a lot of companies trying to figure out, small, medium businesses and large enterprises, how does this affect my product roadmap and how does this affect my bottom line as an internal process? That's why you see a lot of people talk about training and education as the initial use cases. But it's the tech stack is hard to navigate for somebody that's not looking to do it as becoming an aspiring game developer or comes from a game dev background. And I think that's probably, that's what we believe is really holding back the lack of content in both AR and VR.
There's a lot of wearables out there, and I know there's some wearable that I saw. It was like bring your own wearables party, which was pretty awesome. Thank you for bringing them. So what do you think the state of wearables are today, and you know, when are they going to be ubiquitous? When are you going to see everybody have them? And even more important, do you think they're going to replace the cell phone?
Well, everything just depends on the timeline. So we'll replace the cell phone, just in what time frame. I actually think even augmenting the cell phone. So like you have an iPhone, you park it, and then you plug it into your headset up above, and that could be everyone's first experience with augmented reality. So it's not even replacing, it's just adding on to. So it's kind of an extra feature on there. So in terms of like, in terms of like the state of where like augmented reality headsets are today, like they're still at the beginning stages. Like the number of HoloLenses that are out there in the world, like there aren't that many yet. Granted, like that's the first version. Like you have like DACR, you have ODG, like it's all at the beginning stages. But in terms of you need to solve the, like enterprise is usually where a lot of the kind of hard tech kind of efforts will go for augmented reality in the beginning. So then figuring out what are the exact problems that they're solving. So I think there's this little bit of a problem in the augmented reality community right now that's preventing some of the stuff that people are kind of thinking about AR for AR's sake. Like you go to some AR meetups and people talk about, oh, here are all the problems for AR, but it still is one step removed from here's like the customer like that's doing something one way and here's how they do it a new way. Okay, you have it for like training, you have it for the beginnings of visualization, like the IKEA app. I mean, I personally believe that the first killer app of augmented reality headsets is going to be computer screens. So like, at least in our place.
What will they look like? Will they look like regular computer screens, or will they be in the new sort of UI?
Probably at the beginning, because everything is incremental. It will be in regular computer screens. Like right now, we have one of our employees, he has like 6 different monitors all lined up, and then it's like essentially like a dome around his head. And like imagine replacing that like probably $3,000 of like computer screens with one $3,000 headset. Like I can totally see that, and then but it needs to be wild field of view, nice resolution, like no tracking error. And then, okay, you need to be able to show someone else the same computer screen and share the same state. So like, there's still a lot of problems to get in there. So for wearable headsets, I mean, I still put that as in the short term, maybe like 2 to 3 years for enterprise. I haven't studied that quite as much, so the rate of adoption there is in question. But for consumer, I view that's probably 5 years at the earliest for the like beginning of adoption for you to see like someone walking around, and then it's not like Google Glass where you're like, haha. Sorry if there are any early Glass adopters.
I have 2, but sorry.
But yeah, I would say for headsets, probably in the 5 to 10 years is my expectation. But I mean, it's always hard to predict the future. The best thing to do is create it, and there's great companies that are in here creating that future who hopefully can do it sooner.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to open it up to questions because we're out of time for panel, but thank you, you guys. Thank you so much. And hopefully we have,
We stay put.
John and Phil can come back up.
I guess
Yeah.
Sweet.
You guys can stay put.
Wish.
There we
I'm
go.
gonna do it for a Fiji.
Do you want,
want a
oh,
Fiji?
is that a real one?
Is the camera in frame there? We might need to scoot down so that we're in the frame
Thank you.
together.
Oh,
I'm good.
There we go. Hopefully there's lots of questions. We've got some amazing people up here. All right,
Keith.
Yeah, I have a question for John. You said that we shouldn't
I think you should take this.
treat
Thanks, John.
our property as being intruded upon or as real property for ARs. But the thing that I'm thinking about, forgetting about our property where people buy words on Google. Do I have some of the things that I'm protecting against it?
Well,
Go ahead.
No, I don't think you should have any protection against that. I think every individual should be free to view the world in like whatever form they want to see it. So I mean, if somebody wants to have a a Snapchat filter that makes things look shiny and bright, like they should be able to make them look shiny and bright. If they want to make them look dark and gothic, they should be able to make them look dark and gothic. I kind of view it as an extension of that. It's just what do you want to see? What information do you want to see? Certainly, I think that if I walk into a retail store, if I'm going to check the price on Amazon, by God, I ought to be able to do that, right? I would.
Checking Amazon's different. If somebody invests in space, right to commercially.
I mean, consumers are going to use all types of different.
Glad he has that one.
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
Let's have an overlay. That I get.
Yeah.
Me personally, if I had an application that was pushing that crap into my eyes, I would take it off. I wouldn't want to see Adidas if I was looking at Nike store. That has no relevance to me, right? I think for any ad to really be effective, and this is why AdSense works so well, is that it's context sensitive, right? It understands what the question that you're trying to ask and tries to give you alternatives to that question, or alternative answers to the question you're trying to ask. If you're just walking past Nike, doesn't mean that you're actually looking for Nike shoes. You're just looking at this facade, right? And if you get presented with something that overlays Nike with Adidas, I would turn that thing off. And I would venture to guess that most people would.
I think personal identity is a really interesting question related to this, which is if I want everyone here to see me as a unicorn because I identify as unicorn, and you are like, nope, I'm not going to see you as a unicorn. I refuse to see you as a unicorn. I'm going to see you as, I don't know, a koala.
Koala. My koala world.
Concept of the commercial space, what people are looking for when they're buying that space, and also obviously the individual has the right to see what they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
The Nike isn't paying to require everybody to be able to see that. I'm just talking about protecting us against competitors, and that's where it starts to get because property isn't just that. It's not a binary, at least in my mind. It's not a binary, right? They used to teach us in law school. It's a bundle of sticks.
Yeah.
So there are a bunch of different rights. So some of those rights exist in the AR world, and I think some of those rights don't. As opposed to just saying it's not real estate, I think some of those apply. I mean, do you disagree?
I think that's one of the challenges we're going to face, right? Is figuring out what the answers to that question are.
Doesn't that assume that there's a public virtual space?
Right.
If there's no such thing as a public virtual space, if I'm playing Pokemon, how can Nike push ads inside of that?
What I think the dystopian cynic spin on that.
Is that you?
Is what if these devices are not going to be cheap or easily accessible for a while? So what if they're subsidized? And so what if I have a really great AR headset that I paid a couple $100 for because some search engine company or some other company that has interest in selling advertising has subsidized it for me, and then that. I agree too. I've always taken the stance of we should probably all agree as a tech community to be very transparent in the data we're collecting and how we're using it, and then don't assume we own it and let the user do it. But the minute you subsidize a device or a technology, we've already learned this very quickly, even the past few years with social media, we're the product in some of those situations. So I think I agree with the more pure take of it's just not a good user experience and I wouldn't want it. But if someone that couldn't afford the latest and greatest device and they're looking at it through something subsidized, that's when that becomes a lot blurrier and murkier.
Well, and it gets even more murky. You don't know.
Yeah.
That's
I apologize for opening that rabbit hole.
a hell
You
of
have
a
a question?
subsidy, though.
Yeah, it's true.
So this pertains to the first discussion too, and I'm interested in what happens when those values in the database becomes decentralized. And is there a play at, if something is in the park, you guys had to remove stuff from parks because it's upon request, right? So if something exists in the physical world, a shiny object exists in the park, a person might want to hop over that fence even though it's closed and see what's over there. Why is that different for augmented reality? How does this change when it becomes decentralized from a mapping perspective? And does it matter if you're statically spawning something like a Pokestop or if it's randomized values, if it's dynamic spawning of those things? If you don't directly control where those things show up, do you have the liability to remove things from that place?
I mean, that's the reason I was just basically saying, hey, if you're making products, then you need to be thoughtful about the design choices you're making. What kind of effect is this going to have in the real world, and how can you design to create a good experience for where it's going to happen and all of the stakeholders that may be involved there. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do that because it is decentralized. There's no central authority for what AR stuff is going to exist in the world. It's by definition, like, people can create this stuff. It can live on an infinite number of servers, and there can be an infinite variety of things that are going to get created all over the place for various reasons. And we need to be mindful of that as product designers and create good products that, think about side effects or things that could happen and try to.
Look at the state of DMCA takedown requests and the internet today. When I imagine augmented reality, you will never be able to create enough requests. Like a municipality, there will be so many applications, so many uses for this. A municipality will never be able to take down everything, right? A business owner will never be able to take down everything. And so that's like how, I'm just wondering about the societal impact of that.
I mean, the difference thing here is like when the internet was being created, there were no norms because it was something new that people hadn't really dealt with before. Right now, there's a lot of kind of social baggage or social customs people have with, this is my fenced area, this is my property, oh, this is a park, this is how it all looks. So if you think about like cities that are a little bit more designed that you need permits for, now if you can change them in AR, it's changing a little bit of the social dynamic in which how people are thinking about how things have been done before. And now if it can be changed quickly and then all this other stuff, it's a lot more kind of, it kind of attacks people a little bit more, if you want to put a harsh term on it, because it's like, no, this is like my fenced garden, this is my park, here's how it all looks like, and then, okay, if there's a whole rush in of people or things start to look different and changed on like these different AR levels, that's what I view the difference is from like how the internet was developed, because it was kind of a Wild West show. No one knew what norms were. It took a decade or two to like really have that more settled in, when while with the physical world, we know how to deal with it. Now we're changing that.
Actually,
I think it all gets a lot clearer if you think of it more as like, a pair of sunglasses or the music that you hear over your, headphones as you're walking around in the world. I mean, it's a kind of filter, it's a kind of augmentation that you choose. We have analog equivalents for that, and so it's really, I would, that's where I think that that's the right place conceptually to come from versus thinking of it as atoms and place. And it gets really weird and confusing, but really it's about what you're putting into your mind as an individual, and individuals should have choice. They should have the ability to choose that and control over that. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
The Wild West aspect reminds me of Snow Crash and how they talk about that.
Yes.
Really hackers.
Well, I think
I just wondered what
related to
this
that, the creator of the wiki isn't actually in Portland, and he hasn't even thought about this 3D stuff yet. And we talked about, I think the wiki is an interesting model to look at, and he's actually done a new version of the wiki which allows you to layer your latest version, and it's decentralized. It looks like a single source of data, but it's actually come from multiple sources. So I think the wiki is an interesting model of like community moderated. It's like, yes, someone originated this, but as a society, it's being edited together, and yeah, there's a process there that might be interesting.
The key is including all the stakeholders, right?
Yep.
Make sure that you include all the people who are impacted by this in a conversation.
Yep.
Most of the time they'll just show up and yell at you, but
Lars?
but in the end they've had their voice, right?
I'd love to shift from the legal.
Okay.
So I made a lot of games in my life, and I started from single player, peer-to-peer multiplayer, big persistent state multiplayer, which is much more interesting, at least to me. And if I heard you correctly, you're basically saying something like that should happen in augmented reality. You have to have persistent state, large worlds where everybody has the same experience and things are persistent and so on. Is that basically what you're saying? And do you guys agree that there is a progression from, single player experiences to peer-to-peer to true persistent state? Is that happening?
Well, if you think about an augmented reality, what is like the new thing that's different about it, say from a game developer's perspective? It's like, okay, you have the same avatars, you have like gameplay and everything else. It's kind of what is the kind of object file of the world? Like normally in a digital context that's uploaded, and if you want to do like a multiplayer game, you just copy that digital file when you download the app. The difference in a augmented reality world is that no file is actually like kind of stored when you download the app. It's kind of built up based off of the environment. So then from a like game developer perspective, just thinking about it on very simple terms, like you just need to essentially create what becomes a dynamic file that you need to kind of interact with. It's kind of a high level way of thinking about it. But then for kind of larger multiplayer, you actually need to have like a kind of regular state of the world or a map.
Just elaborate a bit more. Right now I guess you could call it analogous. We are in the single player state with what ARKit has released, to some extent. And to get to more interesting applications and to really fulfill this promise, the tools are not there. And part of it is enabling this persistence.
Yes.
Yes. Persistent state and synchronization, so time and space.
You said you're a game developer, and that's what you gravitated towards. As a product person, I think those are the most interesting kinds of games, but other kinds of games have different, they're appropriate for different situations and different people's tastes. But to me, it feels like the large-scale MMO is the most interesting ultimate evolution of games, and then to transpose that into the real world is, that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we think that's a super cool. Yeah, exactly. So our game before Pokemon Go, Ingress, global game, 20 million downloads. People are competing over a shared global state continuously, 24/7. There's a huge event in San Francisco this weekend where there'll be many thousands of them will be here in San Francisco, competing over this shared state experience together out in the real world. So those are super cool because they combine like real world social interactions with gaming. Yeah, that's what we're doing. I'll put you on the beta list if you are interested. Sign you up.
But I would to add to that, like the interesting thing about AR, particularly optical view through wearable AR, is you just want other people to see what you see. You may not even care. Like you may not say, I want you to play this virtual chess game. I just want you to be able to see what I see, and like you very quickly run into that. And it goes back to what I was saying, like once you play with this tech enough and you feel like you've gotten past the mind blown phase a little bit, and you're like, I want people to use this because it's cool, you want so badly people to see what you see, this is a key piece of that.
Well, it gives you something to talk about.
Right.
I mean,
Instead of me just,
oh my God, you see that blue bunny?
To collaborate, right? It's to be together
Yes.
at the same time. It's not
Yeah.
to make it isolated.
Yep.
Even just for demos, like earlier, I mean, well, like Daiquiri, really great, but like just having someone kind of go around and staring at the world, and you're just like, okay.
What are they doing?
over there? Like,
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we've actually seen a lot of requests of people who just want like something for demos of like, can I just have an app that I can hold at my phone and see what an AR headset is looking at, because I have no idea how to debug it while they're wearing it. So I actually think from enterprise applications, there are like many different aspects, but like even now we're not even at like the regular single player. It's kind of like an arcade game, but then every time you walk away from it, you unplug it and reset the whole thing.
Yep.
So it's like just getting up to the next level that it's always plugged in.
Matt, you had a question, right?
Yeah, it was more on the last topic, so I'll chime in on this then.
Okay, awesome. Alice.
Sorry.
I guess someone was saying the utility of AR and really having the utility of relevance. So the question I have is, since with computers, it's we presume that computers are really only useful when they do the things that we need them to do without us asking. So it's going to be automatic or sort of. And if computers can now see everything that we see, they should be able to make automatic decisions. So I'm wondering to what extent you think that AI companies or AR companies with very strong machine learning are going to win in AR. And I guess that comes back to these philosophical questions again about, when we walk up to someone, do we see LinkedIn or do we see Tinder and the decisions that are default there and kind of what AI is going to do in AR world?
I mean, there's kind of two different layers to that if you want to think about it from a technical perspective. First one is like, there's kind of just, well, I guess the three of them. So first one is just like, what is the state of the world, which is a little less on the AI side. Like AI is, what is the right representation? Like, how do you like make decisions about it? Kind of like, okay, if you search for something, what type of results do you get there? That's more of an AI style problem. So I think for AR, like where we're gonna see it is like one, first with like sort of semantic knowledge. So in the academic community, there's kind of semantic mapping, semantic understanding, segmentation of the world, which that just means like knowing a wall is a wall or knowing a floor is a floor rather than some raw plane that like kind of makes this up. So right now we're still in the very early days. And then like later on beyond that is what can you do with it and what kind of information can you pull from the digital world? Like saying like, okay, Tinder, LinkedIn, like scares me like hell when Facebook comes out with their like Facebook AR headset and like you can see everyone's profile and what they did like 3 years ago. Here's a memory of what this person did. Like, but I think in terms of the AI phase for right now for AR, it's on a little bit early. It still needs time to develop on a little bit more of the fundamental infrastructure, and it's going to be more how do we flesh out some of that infrastructure, I think in terms of understanding the semantics. Again, wall is wall, floor is floor.
I've always seen it as kind of a progression from maps. Computers need to understand the world around us, maps. Computers need to understand what's in the world around us, objects. And computers need to understand what we do in the world around us. So I've always seen like a progression from maps to objects to actions. Do you guys feel similar in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, you start first understanding the geometric composition of the world without labeling that this geometric blob of thing is a chair or a table. And then, given that you know it's a chair or a table, what do you do? How do you build a, let's say, like an API that, yeah, if you want to build like an obstacle avoidance or some sort of digital pet that navigates through your room, if it's in a couch, you want the pet to sleep or scratch it.
Well, and even giving content creators access to that, to segue into that, so content creators can then know it's a table, so let's spawn a cool holographic object on the table.
Yeah, there's
One
definitely
way
a
to-
progression.
One way to think about it is, I mean, I don't know, many things in the world, maybe most things in the world at this point have a sort of digital doppelganger. Like all of us do, this building does, the bus stop does, the bus does, like, almost all the atoms that we touch, a product, like there's a digital, there's digital information about it, there's a digital service that could be accessed, and it's just a matter of, it's a little awkward to do it today. You could get out your phone, you could scan something or type in a search or whatever, go to the right web page and start looking up the bus schedule. I view AR as really just this kind of shortcut. I mean, it's almost a user interface thing of, it's just connecting you to that digital version of the world that already exists out there, but makes it more immediately accessible and more naturally accessible. And I think that has an exponential effect on what you can do with it, and how we'll lead our lives.
I think we have time for one more question, by the way. So it's all you.
Is there some thoughts on the AR world beyond location? Because when you think about AR gaming, a lot of it is, and we spoke about multiple ARs, but on a day-to-day life, if you look at the location that we traverse, in many ways they're limited. So do you guys spend any time thinking about beyond location, what other variants of AR-based gaming at all?
Oh, well, if you think about what's new for AR gaming, there's kind of two main kind of technical aspects that really change with it. One is the position of the kind of camera matters in the world, so both in terms of where you're walking in parks, but also where you are with where the phone is in space, how do you draw with your phone with ARKit. The second aspect is the real world becomes content. We had one, I always love this example, this one game developer working with us who designed a game where you can mine color from the world. So you can actually use the real world as content in terms of it. So it's not just GPS location, it's not just phone location, but also kind of taking in the map, as we were talking about, of the world and incorporating that. So the third real aspect of augmented reality is kind of a little bit more fuzzy and emotional. It fulfills a fantasy for people. Seeing a Pokemon in the real world, it kind of for those 5 seconds, really fulfills a fantasy that makes the game more compelling than if that wasn't there in some cases.
For example, with computer vision, we could render a 3D object of that book behind you, and that could become content that comes onto my platform.
Yeah, sort of this blend between, traditionally computer graphics and computer vision have a very hard line in terms of the field. So here it really blends them together. So you could take the video feed and treat that as the graphics. To some extent, you could create and transmute objects, real objects in the world, change them. You could take patches of the world and treat them as texture. So you could build, a digital chameleon, and then it takes the patch of the carpet and it becomes the carpet texture. Or transformer, you could hide real world objects in your AR vision, so kind of diminish reality. So you could do all these funky things at the edge of graphics and edge of computer vision.
I would kind of reiterate that a little bit back to the
In the future, not right now.
conversation around
Setting expectations.
reconstruction and object recognition. They're necessary for a lot of this kind of AR fundamental stuff, but to make that accessible to a creative game developer in a meaningful way is we don't necessarily know what all the possibilities are, but they're not only exposing that technology, but then creating tools and workflows. Game development for a long time has been very hard-coded and meticulous, and there is some discussion around, is game development going to become more like a dungeon master type of role, where you're dealing with variable inputs, and you still have to maintain a linear storyline somehow in a very arbitrary physical context. And I think the only example I can think of off the top of my head maybe is fragments from HoloLens, where they had a character that they sort of maybe recognized a chair, and so the character would sit on a chair. But so we have so much further to go. So I think as far as gaming, telling a story that's contextually aware and responsive, I think there's so much potential there, but you've got to expose that to the creatives. For the really creative person, the writer who became a game designer, for them to be able to say, well, if we happen to be in the person's living room, we could tell this scene, and it gets so complex, and we just don't have the tools yet to manage that.
Fragments, it's room-based in
Yeah.
most AR apps, and we engage with the HoloLens community quite a lot. Most AR apps are room-based, so how
Yep.
do you get an AR app to go from room-based to house-based?
Yep.
And take you on an adventure through your house?
Well, next one is, how do you take it out in the real world, outside, right?
Yeah, that's the evolution, right?
That's the evolution.
Room-based, house-based, world-based.
We can blame technical limitations on that for a little while.
we're all starting on a small level. They're like, oh yeah, no, you have the glow.
Well, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedules. I'm sorry for bombing the question for Escher Reality, which is about stateful AR, not the state of AR. I know the difference. I apologize. I've been sitting here like beating myself up for that. I'm sorry, guys. And thanks everyone for coming. And we're going to have some more snacks and drinks afterwards. So hopefully everyone will want to mingle for a little bit. And then once we put together some video and stuff like that, we'll send it out to everybody. Thank you.
Cool.